Hundreds of ancient stone faces were buried staring at the dirt. This is the bizarre truth unearthed at Olmec sites across Mesoamerica, where colossal heads and powerful statues were deliberately interred upside down. By the end of this exploration, you will possess a complete picture of the 8 leading theories that explain this profound ancient practice. We will investigate why a civilization would hide its greatest artworks and what these inverted giants reveal about fear, power, and the sacred. This journey peels back layers of ritual and politics to show how a society manages its own history. What do you believe drives a culture to turn its monuments on their heads? The humid air of Veracruz hung thick over the ancient earth as brushes revealed not a fallen monument, but a hidden one. Archaeologists in the mid-20th century, led by figures like Matthew Stirling, made a series of discoveries that would reshape our understanding of Mesoamerica's mother culture. They first found the colossal heads, those immense basalt portraits of rulers with stern, helmeted gazes, but the deeper revelation was their condition. These giants were not simply lying where they had fallen. They had been placed with undeniable care into specially dug pits, their faces pressed firmly into the ground. Imagine the moment of uncovering one. The team would first expose the smooth, curved back of the stone head. More digging would reveal the shoulders, the broad form, but the identity, the expressive face meant to command respect, remained stubbornly turned away, sealed in an intimate conversation with the earth itself. This was no accident of war or hasty cleanup. The pits were neat, the placement was intentional. This deliberate inversion presented a quiet, powerful mystery that toppled simpler ideas of the Olmec world. It moved the narrative from a society that just created art to one that performed profound, symbolic acts with it. The burial was a ritual, a meaningful gesture that spoke of endings, respect, or perhaps fear. Each unearthed statue, resting silently in its inverted state, became a question. What cultural force is strong enough to take a symbol of supreme authority and deliberately hide it from the sky? The search for that answer leads us from the dirt of the burial pits into the complex landscape of Olmec belief and power. This leads us to the first and perhaps most profound explanation for these inverted burials. Archaeologists call it ritual termination, a practice far more complex than simple destruction. Across ancient Mesoamerica, objects, buildings, and even entire cities were believed to possess a living essence, a sacred energy that required careful management. When a powerful ruler passed from this world, or when a ceremonial cycle came to an end, the physical symbols of that era could not simply be discarded. Their spiritual force remained active, and left unchecked, it could become unstable or even dangerous to the community. The solution was a formal, reverent decommissioning. Think of it not as an act of vandalism, but as a sacred retirement ceremony. The statue, once a vibrant conduit of authority, needed to be carefully neutralized, its power gently returned to the earth from which it came. The deliberate act of turning it upside down was a key part of this process. In Mesoamerican belief, the face was the seat of identity, consciousness, and vision. By placing the statue's face into the dirt, its gaze was severed from the world of the living. It was symbolically blinded, its connection to human affairs respectfully closed. This allowed the essence within the stone to sleep or to be transformed without posing a threat to the new order. Experts like Cyphers, who has worked extensively at Olmec sites, emphasize that these were not acts of contempt. They were necessary procedures of cosmic maintenance, ensuring the safe transition of power and the cyclical renewal of time itself. What we might misinterpret as an insult was, in their worldview, the ultimate act of reverence. It was how a society honored the sacred by ensuring its peaceful rest. But if ritual termination was an act of reverence, then a second, darker theory suggests its exact opposite. The inverted burials could be powerful acts of political iconoclasm, a calculated erasure of the past by those who seized power. Picture a rival faction finally taking control of the great city of San Lorenzo. The old ruler's statues, those immutable symbols of his authority, would be intolerable reminders of the defeated regime. Simply smashing them might not be enough. The new leaders would need a public, theatrical display to demonstrate their total victory, so they would topple each monument with ropes and levers, a physical manifestation of the fallen dynasty. Then, with deliberate ceremony, they would roll the heavy stone faces into freshly dug pits, positioning them upside down. This final inversion was the ultimate insult, a profound humiliation. In Mesoamerican thought, to be turned upside down was to be cast out of the natural order, denied dignity and a connection to the heavens. Scholar David Grove points out that such practices were meant to symbolically end the memory and spiritual authority of the old leaders, ensuring their influence could never return. This was more than destruction, it was a rewriting of history in stone and earth. The buried face staring into darkness represented a silenced voice and a cancelled legacy. This theory frames the pits not as sacred resting places, but as political prisons for stone, where the victors quite literally buried the evidence of the old world to legitimize their new one. It is a stark reminder that the symbols of power are often the first targets when that power changes hands, and that history is frequently curated by those who remain standing. This deliberate inversion connects to a cosmic map, a vision of reality where up and down were not just directions but sacred addresses. For the Olmec and the cultures they influenced, the universe was a structured, layered entity. The heavens stretched above, the mortal world sat in the middle, and below lay the underworld, a place of profound power known in later Maya tradition as Xibalba. This was not merely a land of the departed, it was a source of fertility, the origin place of life-giving waters, and the regenerative force of the earth itself. Within this cosmology, placing a statue upside down was a precise, symbolic act. It was not a random discard, but a targeted relocation. By turning the face toward the soil, the community was actively directing the statue's essence, its spiritual identity, downward into that chthonic realm. This could be seen as a respectful return, sending the embodied power of a ruler or deity back to the ancestral source for renewal. Alternatively, it might have been an act of alignment, connecting the monument to the fertile, regenerative forces bubbling up from below, ensuring those energies continued to bless the living world. Anthropologist Carl Taub offers a compelling perspective, linking these rituals to the Mesoamerican understanding of time as great, cyclical epochs. At the end of a major calendrical cycle, the old world order needed to be ceremonially concluded to birth the new one. An inversion ritual, like burying a monument, physically enacted that cosmic reset. It was a way of turning the symbolic world literally on its head, a controlled upheaval to maintain the ultimate balance of the universe. So the statue in the pit, face to the earth, becomes a keystone in a grander design. It is an anchor point, tethering a moment of profound cultural change to the eternal cycles of death and rebirth that governed all things. Yet another possibility shifts the focus from the spiritual to the remarkably practical. What if these burials were not an end but a form of safekeeping? After all, the creation of a single colossal head represented a staggering investment of labor and skill. Quarrying multi-ton basalt blocks from mountains miles away, then transporting them without wheels or pack animals, was a monumental undertaking. To simply smash such a masterpiece would be an act of profound waste, even for a conquering enemy. This leads to the storage theory, which sees the lined pits not as graves but as protective vaults. By carefully interring a statue upside down, the community could shield its carved surfaces from the relentless tropical sun, torrential rains, and physical abrasion. The inverted position itself may have been the most stable way to lay the rounded, heavy object without risk of it shifting and cracking. Archaeologists note that many of the recovered statues found in these contexts are in exceptional condition, their sharp facial features and intricate details preserved far better than those left exposed on the surface. This suggests a conscious act of conservation, perhaps during times of political uncertainty, conflict, or even a planned relocation. Leaders made the decision to hide their most important cultural assets, banking them in the earth for calmer times. It reframes the Olmec not only as master artists and ritualists, but as pragmatic curators of their own heritage. They may have buried these faces with the quiet hope, or even the expectation, that a future generation would one day uncover them and understand their significance anew. This theory adds a layer of forward thinking to the mystery, where the earth itself becomes the ultimate museum storage facility. The soil itself holds a detailed record of these events, a silent witness to the careful procedure that unfolded centuries ago. When archaeologists meticulously excavate these pits, they are not just removing dirt, they are reading a story written in layers of earth and intention. The first clue is the pit's construction. These were not hasty holes dug in anger. They are neat, rectangular excavations, often lined with imported materials like layers of colored clay, bright red or pure white, or paved with flat stone slabs. This preparation signals a ceremonial space, a designated container for a sacred act. At the famed site of La Venta, researchers found that some of these burials included precious offerings placed alongside the inverted statues. Jade celts, those polished green axes symbolic of lightning and maize, and small, delicate figurines were carefully positioned within the fill. These were items of immense value and spiritual power, not things you would casually toss into a trash pit. Their presence transforms the burial from an act of disposal into a dedicatory practice, a kind of sacrifice or gift meant to accompany the statue into its new state. The arrangement of the statues themselves tells another part of the tale. In some pits, multiple monuments were placed together, sometimes aligned along a specific axis, perhaps oriented to a significant mountain or celestial body. This coordination speaks volumes. It required planning, labor, and communal agreement. Moving a 20-ton stone head is a public project, not a secretive act of spite. The stratigraphy, the sequence of soil layers, provides the final, crucial timestamp. By studying these layers, archaeologists can see that the burials occurred during specific, identifiable phases in the city's history. They often coincide with evidence of major renovation, like the covering of an old plaza with a new pyramid, or a clear shift in the style of pottery and artifacts found in living areas. This forensic evidence paints a clear picture. These were not random acts of violence or neglect that happened in the dead of night. They were planned, community-wide ceremonies that marked a definitive turning point, a conscious closing of one chapter and the deliberate beginning of another. The earth records a moment when the entire city paused to participate in a profound ritual, turning its stone ancestors face down not in darkness, but in a context of profound significance. These colossal heads were not generic symbols but powerful, individualized portraits. Each one possesses a distinct face, a unique helmet design, some even bearing personal markings or scars. They were likely carved to immortalize specific, powerful rulers, making them the ultimate symbols of a person's authority and perhaps their connection to divine ancestors. This personal dimension transforms the act of inversion from a general ritual into something far more targeted. When a community chose to bury one of these heads upside down, they were not just retiring an old monument. They were directly confronting the legacy of the person it represented. The act could signal the definitive end of that ruler's bloodline, a public rejection of the policies enacted during their reign, or a ceremonial severing of their spiritual influence. In Nahua belief, which shares roots with earlier Mesoamerican ideas, a person's vital force, their tonally, resided in the head. By deliberately placing the stone portrait face down into the earth, the community may have been performing a profound transfer, guiding that concentrated life force out of the world of the living and back into the regenerative heart of the planet. The sheer physical effort required makes this intention undeniable. Moving a 20-ton basalt head from its place of honor to a prepared pit, carefully turning it over and covering it was a massive logistical undertaking. It demanded the coordinated labor of hundreds, if not thousands, of people over many days. This was not a covert act done in shame, but a public, communal project. Everyone would have witnessed the effort, understood the cost, and absorbed the message. The inversion of these portraits forces us to see the Olmec not as a faceless civilization, but as a society deeply engaged with the personal dimensions of history and memory. We are left wondering about the stories that were not carved in stone, the conflicts and successions that led a community to make such a definitive, physical statement about an individual who once commanded their world. What personal drama, what shift in the winds of favor could justify turning a king's immortalized face to the dirt? The desire to manage the spiritual legacy of powerful objects is not unique to the Olmec world. Across the globe and throughout history, other ancient cultures performed strikingly similar acts, revealing a shared human impulse to carefully control the sacred. In ancient Egypt, the names and faces of certain pharaohs, like Akhenaten, were systematically chiseled away from monuments after their deaths. This damnatio memoriae, a condemnation of memory, was not mere vandalism. It was a formal effort to erase a ruler's spiritual presence from the cosmos, preventing their soul from receiving sustenance in the afterlife, and thus negating any future influence. Far to the north, in the wetlands of Roman Britain and Scandinavia, communities made ritual deposits of weapons, cauldrons, and even wooden statues into bogs and lakes. These were valuable objects offered not to people but to the waters, perhaps to appease deities, mark a treaty, or formally retire items whose power had become too great or too dangerous to keep in the community. Moving to another continent, the moche culture of ancient Peru provides another parallel. At sites like Huaca de la Luna, they conducted elaborate ceremonies where magnificent polychrome murals depicting deities were deliberately entombed under layers of new adobe construction. Each burial sealed away an old religious narrative, making space for a new one in a cyclical renewal of sacred space. These widespread practices show a common thread. When belief systems shift, when dynasties fall, or when a community feels the need to reset its relationship with the divine, the physical symbols of that old order require careful, ritualized handling. They cannot be thrown away like common trash, for they are still charged with meaning. They must be deactivated, offered, or respectfully sealed. This comparative lens is crucial. It tells us the Olmec were not bizarre or alone in their actions. They were participating in a near-universal ancient behavior, a profound human tradition of grappling with the spiritual weight of history. What makes their practice so distinctive, so memorable, is the specific, consistent choice they made within that tradition. While others defaced, drowned, or entombed, the Olmec chose inversion. That deliberate act of turning a face to the earth is their unique ritual fingerprint, a choice that likely stems directly from their specific cosmological vision of a layered universe and the potent symbolism of directing a gaze into the underworld. By seeing their actions as part of a global pattern, we better appreciate both their shared humanity and their extraordinary cultural signature. The inverted faces may have been an act of reverence, but they could also have been a necessary precaution against a dangerous spiritual force. This fourth key theory moves beyond politics and cosmology into the realm of raw human emotion, the deep-seated need to protect a community from unseen threats. In the Olmec worldview, the stone was not inert. A colossal head, especially one carved in the likeness of a powerful ruler, was believed to be infused with that individual's essence, a concentration of their will and spiritual energy. As long as the statue stood in the plaza, that energy had a designated place and purpose. But what happens when that era ends? The monument, now representing a past authority, could become spiritually volatile. If neglected or worse, actively dishonored by a new regime, the essence within might awaken not in benevolence but in anger. An offended ancestral spirit was a terrifying prospect. In a world where every harvest, every rainfall, and every child's health was seen as part of a delicate balance with the supernatural, such a spirit could bring drought, illness, or a string of misfortunes upon the entire community. The inverted burial, then, becomes a profound act of containment. By turning the face into the earth, the living were symbolically blinding the statue, severing its gaze from the world above. They were effectively trapping its potent energy underground, directing it into the domain of the earth where it could be absorbed or neutralized. This was not an insult, but a critical form of spiritual hygiene. Think of it as carefully capping a well of powerful but potentially hazardous energy. The community was safeguarding its own future by ensuring the past remained peacefully at rest. Support for this intimate fear comes from ethnographic studies of modern indigenous groups in the regions once dominated by the Olmec. Many maintain a respectful, even cautious, attitude toward ancient objects found in the earth, believing they hold an old power that must be handled carefully or left entirely undisturbed. This lingering cultural memory suggests that for the Olmec, the concern was very real. The burial ritual, therefore, served a dual purpose. It was a practical solution to a perceived spiritual danger and a psychological necessity, allowing the living to move forward without the looming shadow of ancestral wrath. It transforms the burial pits from simple graves into something resembling sacred insulation, a buffer zone between the volatile power of history and the fragile well-being of the present. This duality of destruction and preservation lies at the very heart of the mystery. Were these inverted burials an act of erasure or a sophisticated form of archiving? On the surface, the act of toppling and hiding a monument seems like the ultimate attempt to erase a memory from the community's consciousness. Iconoclasm, the deliberate destruction of cultural symbols, is a tool used throughout history to sever a people from their past and legitimize a new regime. Yet the evidence from Olmec sites complicates that simple narrative. The pits are carefully prepared, the statues are handled with a level of care that prevents damage, and precious offerings are sometimes included. This is not the frenzied smash and bury of a conquering army. It is a procedure. Think of a librarian carefully removing a controversial, powerful book from the main shelves. The book is not burned or torn apart. It is placed in a special collection, stored under specific conditions, with a record of its removal kept. It is taken out of public circulation, but its existence, its very essence, is preserved. The Olmec may have been performing a similar act on a monumental scale. By burying these statues, they were removing potent symbols from the active stage of daily political and spiritual life. The memory, the history they represented, was not deleted. It was filed away, stored in the most secure vault they knew, the earth itself. This transforms the statues from simple monuments into intentional time capsules. They were placed outside the flow of contemporary events, but deliberately left within the cultural landscape, waiting for what? Perhaps for a time of crisis when their power might be needed again. Perhaps for a future generation who would understand their significance in a new light. This practice reveals a profound and nuanced relationship with history. Ancient societies did not see the past as a linear, distant thing to be studied. It was a living, breathing force, constantly interacting with the present. The weight of that past, of all those ancestors and their deeds, could be overwhelming. To simply let every monument of every former leader stand would create a landscape cluttered with competing claims to authority and spiritual presence. The ritual burial then becomes an act of cultural curation. It is a way to manage the weight of history, to respectfully shelve certain chapters so that the current chapter could be written clearly. It is not forgetfulness, but a form of curated remembrance. The community decides what stays in the active story and what goes into the sacred archive, ensuring the narrative of their identity remains coherent and sustainable. The buried face, therefore, is not silenced forever. It is merely listening, turned toward the deep earth, holding its story in trust for an unknown future. Stone itself can be an offering to the earth. This fifth key theory moves us from the realms of politics and fear into the fundamental rhythm of Olmec life, the agricultural cycle that sustained their civilization. For a society built on maize cultivation in a landscape of tropical forests and seasonal rivers, fertility was not just an economic concern, it was the central pillar of existence. The earth was not merely dirt, it was a living, generative womb, a sacred source of all life. Within this worldview, the act of burial takes on a profoundly different meaning. Scholars like Rebecca Gonzalez-Locke have suggested these inverted interments could be powerful acts of sympathetic magic, a ritual planting of stone. Imagine the logic. To ensure a bountiful harvest, you plant a seed. You bury it, turning it upside down in the soil, trusting it will transform and sprout upward with new life. Now apply that same symbolic action to a colossal head or a mighty statue. These were objects carved from basalt, a stone born of volcanic fire, and volcanoes were deeply linked to concepts of fertility, rain clouds, and the primordial forces of creation. By carefully placing such a powerful object face down into a prepared pit, the community was, in essence, planting it. They were investing a symbol of concentrated human authority and spiritual energy into the earth's womb, with the hope that this energy would germinate. It was a sacrifice of political iconography to nourish the land itself. The goal was not to end the statue's story, but to redirect its potency, to channel it into ensuring seasonal rains, fertile soil, and abundant maize. This theory finds support in the placement of some burials. At sites like San Lorenzo, archaeologists have noted alignments between certain buried monuments and natural water sources, springs, or the edges of prime agricultural land. The statue becomes a permanent ritual offering, a conduit anchoring the community's prayers for sustenance directly into the landscape. This transforms our understanding of the pits from graves or prisons into sacred nurseries. The inverted face is not blinded, but is instead in intimate communion with the source of all growth. It reframes the entire practice as an act of profound, hopeful reciprocity. The Olmec, in this light, were making a long-term bargain with the forces of nature, trading a stone embodiment of their own power for the continuing generosity of the world that fed them. Think of the sound of hundreds of voices chanting in unison, straining against ropes thick as a man's arm. The logistics behind these burials transform them from a quiet ritual into a monumental public event. Moving a 20-ton basalt head even a short distance was a staggering feat of engineering and social organization. It required the coordinated labor of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of individuals working for days or even weeks. Teams would have laid down a track of wooden rollers, constantly moving them from the back to the front as the massive stone inched forward. Others would pull on immense ropes made from woven fibers, their movements synchronized by the rhythmic calls of overseers. This was not the work of a small, secretive group. It was a community-wide project visible to every man, woman, and child in the city. The digging of the pits was another massive undertaking. These were not shallow holes, they were carefully measured excavations, often lined with imported colored clays or paved with stones, requiring skilled labor to prepare. The final act of tipping the statue, of guiding its immense weight into the pit and positioning it face down, would have been the most delicate and dangerous moment of all. A single misstep could shatter the monument or injure dozens. The success of this operation speaks to a highly organized society with clear chains of command, likely directed by religious specialists or political leaders who understood the precise ritual requirements. This transforms our understanding of the event. The burial was not something that happened to the statue. It was something the entire community did with the statue. It was a performance, a physical drama played out on the grandest stage, the very heart of the city. The labor itself was part of the ritual's meaning. By investing their sweat and effort into this act, every participant became an active agent in the cosmic reset, in the political transition, or in the offering to the earth. The shared exertion reinforced social bonds and demonstrated the collective power of the community. It was a vivid, physical lesson in unity and purpose. Imagine the scene after the statue was finally settled into its earthen cradle. The tension would break. There might have been feasting, music from drums and flutes, and communal chanting to mark the completion of this sacred duty. The mystery, therefore, is not just about why the statues were buried upside down. It is equally about how the living society came together to make it happen. The silent, inverted face in the ground is the end result of a roaring, vibrant, and profoundly human collaboration. The stone itself was a message. The Olmec did not carve their monuments from just any rock. They chose basalt, a dense volcanic stone forged in the fires deep beneath the earth. This material was not a casual selection. Sourcing these immense blocks required expeditions to distant mountains like the Tuxtlas, a monumental effort involving transport over rivers and land without the wheel. The stone's origin tied it directly to the realm of volcanoes, which the Olmec saw as portals to a powerful underworld and sources of both destructive force and fertile soil. Basalt represented permanence, endurance, and a sacred chthonic power. Its hardness meant the portrait would last for generations, a fitting vessel for a ruler's immortal essence. Yet they took this symbol of fiery, enduring strength and deliberately placed it into the soft, receptive embrace of the earth. This was a profound symbolic marriage. The hard, eternal stone met the soft, transient soil. The element born of subterranean fire was returned to the element of growth and decay. This union of opposites was the very heart of the ritual. It was not a defeat of the stone, but a completion. By burying the unyielding basalt in the yielding earth, the Olmec were enacting a cosmic balance, integrating the enduring memory of authority with the cyclical processes of nature. This material dialogue grew even richer with the inclusion of other sacred substances. Archaeologists have found that some burial pits were carefully lined with layers of colored clay, vibrant reds, bright yellows, and pure whites. In Mesoamerican cosmology, colors were not merely decorative. They were deeply symbolic, often corresponding to cardinal directions, elemental forces, and deities. Red might be linked to the east, the rising sun, and the life-giving force of blood. White could represent the north, ancestors, or purity. Yellow often connected to the south, the sun at its zenith, and ripe maize. By lining the pit with these specific clays, the ritual space was transformed. It became a microcosm, a small, perfect model of the ordered universe, with the inverted statue placed at its symbolic center. This careful preparation shows the burial was a precise act of world-making, not just disposal. Then there were the offerings, sometimes placed alongside or within the fill surrounding a buried monument. Researchers find small, exquisite objects made of jade. To the Olmec, jade was the ultimate precious substance, more valuable than gold. Its cool, translucent green color evoked clear water, lush vegetation, and the very essence of life and fertility. It was the stone of the living world, of sprouting maize and flowing rivers. Including jade in a burial pit created another layer of symbolic conversation. The dark, volcanic basalt of the underworld was now accompanied by the green, watery jade of the surface world and the heavens. It was as if the community was offering the most precious element of life itself to accompany the monument into its new state. This act suggests the burial was also a gift, an exchange. The hard, enduring power of the past was being offered to the earth, and in return, the community was investing the precious symbol of life and fertility into the same sacred space, hoping to ensure continuity. Every material choice, from the mountain-born basalt to the cosmologically colored clays and the life essence of jade, was semantically charged. The burial pit was not a hole in the ground. It was a carefully constructed ritual chamber where different realms of meaning, endurance and transience, fire and water, the underworld and the living world were brought into deliberate relationship. The inversion of the statue, the turning of its face to the earth, was just one powerful gesture within this much larger, more complex statement. It was the final, decisive act in a symphony of symbolism, where every element from the ground up was speaking a sacred language. This profound material conversation forces us to ask what other silent languages are waiting in the earth, spoken not in words but in stone, clay, and jade. The sky above the Olmec world was not a distant ceiling but a vast turning clock. This sixth key theory asks us to look upward, to consider if the stars themselves dictated the timing of these earthly burials. Could a solar eclipse or the rising of a specific planet have been the signal to turn a stone face to the soil? For Mesoamerican cultures, astronomy was the ultimate calendar, governing everything from planting seasons to the most sacred ceremonies. The movement of celestial bodies was a direct expression of divine will. Researchers exploring this possibility suggest the inverted burials may have been precisely timed to coincide with powerful astronomical events. Imagine the spectacle of a total solar eclipse when day suddenly becomes night and the natural order seems to flip. In that moment of cosmic inversion, performing a parallel ritual on Earth, turning a symbol of authority upside down would have been seen as a profound act of alignment. The community would be mirroring the heavens, harmonizing human action with a temporary celestial disorder to help restore balance. The orientation of the burial pits themselves provides another clue. Some archaeologists have noted that certain pits, or the statues within them, are aligned along specific axes that point toward the setting sun on a solstice or the position where Venus, the brilliant morning star, would crest the horizon. In later Maya belief, Venus was intimately linked with warfare and the cyclical journey of rulers into the underworld. An Olmec statue buried in alignment with Venus might have been part of a ritual escort, its inverted gaze following the path of that celestial traveler into the realm below. While definitive proof, like an inscription stating the exact date of a burial, remains elusive for the Olmec, the architectural and calendrical precision of their successors makes the theory compelling. It reframes the ritual from a purely political or agricultural act into a cosmic one. The Olmec, in this view, were not just reacting to events on the ground. They were choreographers, timing their most significant communal dramas to the grand, silent ballet of the heavens. The statue in the pit becomes more than an offering to the earth. It becomes a mediator, a fixed point where the terrestrial and the celestial realms were deliberately brought into conversation. This perspective suggests the inverted faces were not looking down in defeat, but were instead oriented within a much larger stellar map, their final position a single note in a symphony written across the sky. The earth was sealed, but the city's story was far from over. Following these profound ritual events, the landscape of San Lorenzo and other Olmec centers did not fall silent. Instead, they entered a new phase of vibrant activity. The very ground that held the inverted statues became the literal foundation for the next chapter. Archaeologists have uncovered that shortly after the burial ceremonies, major construction projects were initiated directly over the pits. New earthen platforms were raised, fresh plaster floors were laid, and expansive plazas were redesigned. This was not an accidental building spree. It was a deliberate act of urban renewal, a physical and symbolic reset. Imagine a community gathering not to mourn a loss, but to celebrate a new beginning. Workers would bring basketloads of clean fill to cover the sacred pit, then carefully pack down layers of colored clay and earth to create a perfectly level surface. On this new ground, they would erect structures aligned to different celestial points or build altars for a changed ritual focus. The old order, now respectfully contained beneath their feet, provided a stable base for the new one to rise. This process transforms our understanding of the burial's purpose. It was not an act of erasure followed by abandonment. It was a necessary rite of passage for the city itself, a ceremonial cleansing that made space both physically and spiritually for a new architectural and social phase. The community was actively integrating the memory of the buried power into the living landscape, weaving the past into the foundation of the future. They were not discarding history, they were building upon it. The inverted statue, forever part of the site's sacred geography, continued to exert a quiet influence. Its presence below may have sanctified the space above, turning a new plaza or platform into a place of heightened significance, a point of connection between the deep ancestral past and the active present. This cyclical view of history, where endings are prerequisites for beginnings, helps us see these cities not as static museums, but as dynamic, breathing entities. The burial was the pivotal hinge between chapters, the deliberate moment when the community gathered its collective will, turned a page, and began the story anew on fresh, yet deeply rooted ground. The stone faces were not generic but portraits of distinct individuals. Each colossal head carries a unique expression, a specific set of lips, eyes, and a helmet design that scholars believe represents a real ruler. This makes the act of inversion even more pointed. When these individualized visages were turned to the earth, something profound happened to their identity. That stern, recognizable face, meant to project authority for generations, was suddenly hidden. It was rendered anonymous, its personal power visually erased. In that dark pit, the unique leader became just another stone, his distinct features masked by uniform soil. This could symbolize the final, ceremonial stripping of personal authority, the moment when a ruler's individual legacy was subsumed into the collective, undifferentiated realm of the ancestors. It was a transition from a specific he to a general they. Yet there is another, equally compelling interpretation. Perhaps hiding the face was not an erasure, but a form of protection. In many cultures, the face is the window to the soul, the point of connection. By sealing it against the earth, the living may have been safeguarding that individual's spiritual essence from being accessed, disturbed, or even harnessed by others in the future. This act resonates deeply with global rituals of veiling or masking during sacred transitions. Think of covering a mirror after a passing, or the use of masks in ceremonies to allow an individual to step outside their ordinary self. The Olmec, by literally turning the stone face away from the world, may have been performing a similar rite of passage for the spirit it housed. This forces us to grapple with how they understood personhood itself. Did they believe a ruler's vital essence remained bound to his stone image? If so, was the inverted burial a merciful act, a way to release that spirit from its rocky vessel so it could journey onward? Or was it the opposite, a deliberate binding, anchoring that powerful identity securely to the land forever, making it a permanent, hidden guardian of the place? The soil answers with silence. We are left to interpret the meaning in the absence, in the deliberate void where a face should be. These hidden identities challenge us to see beyond the artifact to the individual, and to wonder about the final, respectful gesture a community makes when it decides that a powerful gaze should see the world no more. The soil beneath a city holds more than artifacts, it holds a record of its fears. A seventh key theory emerges not from the heights of cosmology, but from the hard ground of survival. This perspective suggests the systematic burial of statues was a profound communal response to periods of intense environmental or social stress. Imagine a prolonged drought withering the maize fields, or the slow exhaustion of once fertile soils. Perhaps conflict with neighboring groups escalated, or internal tensions threatened to fracture the community. In such times of uncertainty, when the normal rhythms of life faltered, societies often turned to their most powerful rituals as a form of intervention. The deliberate inversion and burial of these monumental symbols could have been a desperate, yet carefully orchestrated, bargain for stability. It was a sacrifice of the highest order. The community wasn't just storing art, it was offering up the very objects believed to hold protective power, the stone embodiments of ancestral authority, to appease the gods or the forces of nature. By willingly surrendering these central icons of their identity and power, the people were demonstrating ultimate devotion. They were saying, "We will give up what is most precious to us. We will turn our own history face down into the earth if you will restore balance to our world." Archaeological evidence provides subtle clues that support this idea. At some sites, the soil layers that contain these burial events coincide with telltale signs of hardship. There might be a sudden shift in pollen records, indicating deforestation or agricultural strain. The style or abundance of everyday pottery might change, suggesting disruptions in trade or resource availability. Sometimes the burials themselves are part of a larger pattern of site modification that looks less like celebration and more like consolidation, a gathering in of sacred power during a precarious time. This theory reframes the practice as a coping mechanism on a civilizational scale. When the world felt chaotic and beyond control, the community seized upon a ritual they could control completely. The act of coming together to move the impossible weight, to prepare the sacred pit, and to perform the inversion became a way to ritually manage the overwhelming uncertainty outside. It was a dramatic, collective effort to reassert a sense of agency. By performing this symbolic sacrifice, they were actively participating in their own fate, trying to steer the course of events through an act of profound spiritual leverage. The buried statue in this light becomes a solemn offering, a physical petition placed directly into the hands of the earth, pleading for renewal. It transforms the pits from archives or political statements into altars of communal hope, built not from stone, but from shared anxiety and a deep, resilient will to endure. A century ago, the sound of shovels in Veracruz was driven by a different kind of curiosity. Early archaeologists, facing a landscape shrouded in jungle and mystery, saw their primary mission as recovery and display. The goal was to extract these magnificent inverted statues, to clean them, and to place them in the well-lit halls of national and international museums. In a very real sense, they succeeded. They rescued the Olmec from obscurity, giving the world its first glimpse of these masterpieces. Yet this approach came with a profound, unintended cost. To remove a statue from its carefully prepared pit was to sever it from its story. The colored clays, the specific orientation, the surrounding offerings, all that contextual poetry was left behind in the field notes, while the solitary artifact became a trophy of a lost world. It was a divorce of object from meaning, where the ritual of concealment was replaced by the modern ritual of exhibition. The very act of lifting that stone face from the earth and standing it upright in a museum gallery could be seen as a direct reversal of the ancient ceremony. It prompts a difficult, necessary question. Are we, in our zeal to understand, inadvertently committing a kind of archaeological sacrilege, disturbing a rest that was meant to be permanent? This ethical dilemma has fundamentally reshaped the field. Today, there is a powerful movement toward in situ preservation, where possible. The idea is to study the statue within its burial matrix, to document every layer of meaning, and then to respectfully rebury it, leaving the sacred geography intact. This practice acknowledges that the location itself is an integral part of the artifact's significance. More importantly, it centers collaboration with descendant communities. Archaeologists now increasingly work alongside local indigenous groups for whom these landscapes are not just historical sites but living parts of their heritage. These communities often hold oral histories and cultural insights that no foreign expert could ever access from a textbook. Their perspective on the inverted burials might be less about abstract theories and more about a continuing, respectful relationship with ancestors whose work should not be lightly disturbed. This partnership transforms excavation from a colonial extraction into a shared dialogue. It forces the academic world to confront a vital truth. The right to interpret these objects is inseparable from the right to decide their fate. The tension is a defining feature of modern archaeology. On one side is the argument for recovery and global education, the belief that these artifacts belong to all humanity, and that museums serve as vital guardians against looting or environmental decay. On the other is the powerful claim for respect and autonomy, the view that some secrets are meant to stay buried, and that the spiritual intentions of the original people should hold weight in the present. This is not a simple debate with a clear answer. It is an ongoing, necessary conversation about cultural patrimony, about who owns the past and who gets to tell its story. Every time a decision is made to excavate or to preserve in place, these values are weighed. Our modern fascination with the Olmec, our desire to solve their mystery, must therefore be tempered with humility. We are not merely uncovering objects, we are engaging with the final, deliberate acts of a sophisticated culture. The inverted burial was a closing statement. As we open it, we must ask ourselves if we are listening or merely interrupting. This responsibility reframes the entire endeavor. The past is not a quarry to be mined for fascinating facts, but a profound narrative that demands our thoughtful, ethical engagement. The silent faces in the dirt challenge us to be better stewards, reminding us that some truths are understood not only by bringing them to light, but by honoring the darkness they were meant to inhabit. Myths can be as tenacious as the stone from which these heads were carved. Before we can fully grasp the sophisticated reasons behind the inverted burials, we must first clear away some of the most persistent, yet incorrect, explanations that have gathered around them like jungle vine. One popular idea is that these statues were toppled and buried by outside invaders, a foreign army sweeping through to erase the Olmec identity. The evidence, however, tells a different story. The burials are not chaotic acts of war. They are orderly, systematic, and integrated into the very fabric of the city's own development phases. The same community that built the platforms and plazas is the one that carefully interred the monuments, often using those same pits as foundations for new construction. This was an internal ritual, a practice conducted by the Olmec themselves, not something done to them. Another common but chronologically impossible myth suggests the statues were hidden from Spanish conquistadors. This idea collapses under the simplest scrutiny. The Olmec civilization faded from prominence centuries before the Common Era, while Spanish ships did not arrive on these shores until the 1500s. The burials occurred over 1,000 years prior, placing them in a world utterly disconnected from European contact. This misconception reveals our own tendency to project familiar narratives onto the distant past, but it obscures the true, ancient scale of the mystery. Perhaps the most dismissive theory is that these pits were simply garbage dumps, that the statues were broken trash unceremoniously discarded. This is directly contradicted by the archaeology. Trash pits are not lined with precious-colored clays. People do not include valuable jade offerings with their refuse. They do not dig perfectly rectangular, carefully oriented holes just to get rid of an unwanted object. The level of preparation and the inclusion of sacred materials proves these were deliberate, reverent acts. To call it trash is to misunderstand the Olmec world completely, where nothing of such spiritual potency could ever be considered worthless. Finally, we must abandon the search for one single, universal reason that explains every inverted burial across 300 years and multiple city-states. Human motivation is rarely that simple. The reason for burying a ruler's portrait at San Lorenzo during a period of drought might have been profoundly different from the reason for interring a set of altar figures at La Venta during a dynastic transition. The motivations likely varied across time, location, and the specific type of statue being buried. A one-size-fits-all answer is a modern desire for neatness that the ancient world consistently refuses to provide. By consciously setting aside these myths and misconceptions, we do more than correct the record. We sharpen our focus. We create the mental space necessary to appreciate the intricate, overlapping possibilities of ritual termination, political strategy, and cosmic alignment. We move away from simplistic, sensationalist tales of invaders or hiding places and step closer to the nuanced reality of a complex society engaging in a profound dialogue with its own history, its gods, and the very earth beneath its feet. This clarity allows the true sophistication of the Olmec to emerge, not as a civilization of mysterious secrets, but as one of profound and deliberate actions whose meaning we are only beginning to respectfully unravel. The final resting place of these statues may have been far more than a grave. A compelling theory suggests the Olmec were building a permanent underworld court, a subterranean assembly of stone souls. Imagine not a single inverted head, but dozens of them carefully arranged in a sacred precinct beneath the earth. Each statue, representing a specific ruler or deity, would be a member of this eternal council. This aligns with a widespread Mesoamerican belief in a structured afterlife, where ancestors did not simply fade away but continued to wield influence and authority from the realm below. By gathering these powerful effigies in one ritually prepared location, the community was architecting a mirrored governance. The living city above, with its plazas and temples, had its counterpart in this stone necropolis below. The burial site transforms into a capital of the ancestors. This was not a random collection of retired monuments, but a deliberate, functional assembly. The inverted position takes on new meaning here. Facing the earth, these stone figures were not blinded to the world of the living, but were instead oriented toward their new domain, their gazes now presiding over the chthonic realm. They formed a pantheon that would deliberate, guide, and perhaps even intercede on behalf of the community from their eternal chambers. This idea elevates the practice from a series of individual rituals to a grand, long-term project for the cosmos. It reveals a breathtaking vision of continuity. The Olmec, in this view, believed the social and political order they knew was not confined to the sunlit world. It was a dual system with active governance in both the upper and lower worlds, working in tandem to maintain universal balance. The careful placement of each statue, its alignment relative to others, and the offerings left with them could all be seen as parts of installing this council, provisioning it for its endless duties. This transforms our understanding of the pits from isolated events into interconnected components of a single, profound design. The community was not just burying its past leaders, it was commissioning them into eternal service, ensuring that the wisdom and authority of generations would remain actively engaged in the fate of all, forever rooted in the dark, fertile heart of the world. The quiet of the pit held more than earth and stone, it held an echo. An emerging area of research invites us to listen to these ancient rituals, to consider the profound role of sound in the sensory experience of burial. The careful construction of these spaces was not just visual. When a pit was lined with layers of hard, packed clay or paved with flat stone slabs, it became more than a container, it became a resonant chamber. Imagine the space during a ceremony. The air would be thick with incense, the gathered community standing at the rim, As priests or elders began a low chant, or as drummers struck hides stretched taut, the sound waves would travel down into the excavation and interact with every surface. The dense, smooth lining might have reflected certain tones, creating a focused, reverberating hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Conversely, a pit filled with softer, looser materials might have absorbed sound, creating a pocket of sudden, eerie quiet in the midst of the ritual noise. This manipulation of acoustics would not have been accidental. In a world where chants and rhythms were believed to directly communicate with the divine, the acoustic properties of a sacred space were a feature to be engineered. The act of lowering the statue itself would have had a sonic signature, the grinding of stone on earth, the final thud of its weight settling, and then the inverted position of the monument adds another layer. A colossal head buried face down presents its curved, hollow back to the open air. This rounded surface could act as a subtle sound reflector, bouncing vibrations in specific directions, perhaps toward the participants or down into the soil. The hollows where eyes and a mouth were carved, now pressed into the dirt, would have been silenced, their potential to shape sound literally plugged by the earth. This phenomenological approach transforms our understanding. Archaeology is not just the science of what was seen, but the art of reconstructing a full sensory world, of recovering what was heard, felt, and even smelled during these pivotal moments. The symbolic silence imposed on the statue, the hiding of its speaking face, was likely accompanied by an actual acoustic environment, meticulously crafted to deepen the ritual's impact. The combination of visual inversion and controlled sound would have worked in concert, affecting participants on a visceral, subconscious level. The ceremony was not just something they watched, it was something they felt in their bones and heard in the stillness of their own breath. This reminds us that the meaning of the burial was not locked solely in the final arrangement of stone and soil, but in the lived, sensory experience of the community that gathered to perform it. The true power of the ritual resided in that collective moment of sound and silence, a memory that, unlike the stone, faded into the air the moment the last handful of earth was laid. The weight of a 20-ton stone is a declaration of permanence. This ninth key theory shifts our perspective from the spiritual to the geopolitical, viewing the inverted burials as profound acts of territorial claim and legacy building. On a practical level, these monuments were essentially immovable. Once buried, they became permanent features of the landscape, as rooted to that spot as an ancient tree. For a ruling lineage or a community, this was a powerful statement. By placing their most sacred symbols, the very images of their ancestors and gods, deep within the earth of a specific plaza, mound, or ceremonial center, they were doing more than performing a ritual. They were stitching their identity directly into the soil. It was a way of saying, we were here, and our mark is so deep it is buried within the land itself. This transforms the burial from a conclusion into a foundation. Think of it like a cornerstone in a modern building, but one placed upside down and hidden, known only to those who put it there. The statue became a foundational deposit, a physical anchor for collective memory and territorial right. Even in its inverted, symbolic state, its presence continued to define and sanctify the territory. Future generations walking over that buried head would know they were standing on ground consecrated by their forebears. This practice connects directly to concepts of land ownership, inheritance, and the creation of a historical landscape. In a world without written deeds or border fences, how did a community prove its long-standing claim to a place? They pointed to the ancestors and to the sacred objects that represented them, embedded in the earth. The burial ritual was a way of converting political authority into a geographical fact. It turned the statue into a seed of legacy, ensuring its influence would persist not by being seen, but by being inseparably part of the location. This hidden marking system created a layered landscape where the visible city of the living was built upon an invisible city of stone ancestors, together forming an unbreakable bond between people and place. The inverted face, then, is not looking away in defeat, but is instead listening to the heartbeat of the land it now claims for eternity. What does it mean to own a place? For the Olmec, it may have meant becoming part of its deepest, most silent layer. The consistent upside-down orientation itself remains a stubborn enigma. Why this precise position, and not simply laying the statues on their sides or burying them face up? Every other possible angle would have been easier to achieve, yet the Olmec chose the most symbolically charged and logistically challenging one. This uniformity across centuries suggests the inversion was not a secondary detail, but the very core of the ritual's meaning. It speaks to a shared cultural grammar so powerful that its rules were followed without deviation, a silent command passed down through generations of ritual specialists. Did that meaning itself evolve? Scholars grapple with whether the practice in the bustling early Olmec centers like San Lorenzo carried the same intention as in the later, perhaps more ceremonial city of La Venta. Was it initially a pragmatic act of political reset that later became an elaborate cosmological performance? The selection process is another enduring puzzle. Not every statue was buried. What distinguished the chosen ones? Was it the identity of the ruler portrayed, the specific historical moment, or perhaps even a perceived flaw or unique power in the stone itself? These are not just academic questions, they are windows into the decision-making of a civilization, the quiet conversations we can no longer hear. Modern science is now trying to listen. Researchers no longer rely solely on shovels. Ground-penetrating radar sweeps across ancient plazas, sending pulses into the earth to map hidden cavities without disturbing a single grain of soil. Isotopic analysis, a kind of geological fingerprinting, traces the elemental signature of the basalt back to its exact quarry, revealing trade routes and the staggering scale of Olmec logistics. Refined dating techniques, like analyzing microscopic layers of weathering, aim to pin each burial to a specific decade, tying these ritual events to the broader timeline of climate shifts and social change. Every technological advance offers a new lens. The recent discovery of another colossal head, carefully buried at Tres Zapotes, did more than add to the count. It provided fresh context, a new data point in the map of this widespread practice, proving the ritual's reach extended further than previously confirmed. This is why the mystery endures. It refuses to be claimed by a single field of study. It lives at the vibrant intersection where the archaeologist's trowel meets the anthropologist's insight into cultural patterns and the art historian's eye for symbolic form. Solving it requires a chorus of disciplines, each bringing a different piece of the puzzle. This ongoing quest is a powerful reminder that the past is never a closed book. It is a living dialogue. Each generation asks new questions, applies new tools, and hears different echoes in the silence of the pits. The story of the Olmec and their inverted giants is not a finished tale waiting on a museum plaque. It is an active, unfolding conversation, a testament to how the mysteries of deep time continue to captivate, challenge, and connect us to the profound creativity of those who came before. This single, consistent gesture of inversion opens a keyhole into the Olmec soul. Far from a bizarre anomaly, the practice illuminates the foundational pillars of their entire worldview, principles that would echo for millennia across Mesoamerica. At its core, it reveals a society that perceived time not as a straight line marching forward, but as a great turning wheel. History was not a progress to be surpassed, but a cycle to be managed. The burial of a statue was a ritual punctuation mark, a ceremonial full stop that allowed a new sentence to begin. It was an act of temporal housekeeping, making space for the present by formally concluding a chapter of the past. This cyclical understanding of existence meant endings were never absolute. They were necessary transitions, moments of return that fertilized the ground for what came next. The practice also unveils a universe where matter was alive, A stone was not just a rock, it was a potential vessel, a container that could hold the essence of a person, a deity, or a moment in time. The Olmec, therefore, were not simply sculptors. They were animators engaging in a sacred technology that infused inert material with spiritual presence. This belief in animated matter demanded responsibility. You could not casually discard a powerful object any more than you could abandon a living being. Its energy required careful guidance, which is precisely what the inverted burial provided: a ritual to deactivate, transfer, or retire that living force with intention and respect. This deep engagement with the spirit within objects transforms every Olmec site from a collection of artifacts into a landscape of sleeping potentials, where every mound might hold a conscious history. Furthermore, the burials demonstrate a sophisticated political and theological system for managing power. Authority was not seen as a purely human construct, but as a sacred force that flowed between the realms of the living, the ancestors, and the gods. The stone portrait was a conduit for that force, controlling its gaze by turning it skyward in a plaza or soilward in a pit, was a way of directing that spiritual current. This shows the Olmec elite were not just warriors or administrators, but ritual technicians. They understood that true governance involved curating the cosmic landscape, literally grounding the symbols of their rule to maintain balance between the visible and invisible worlds. It was statecraft enacted as sacred drama. These profound concepts did not vanish with the Olmec. As the mother culture of the region, they established ritual templates that resonated deeply with the civilizations that followed. We see clear echoes in later Maya practices of breaking and burying ceremonial objects in caches beneath floors, a way of seeding sacred energy into a building. We see it in the Aztec tradition of ritually interring older deity statues within the foundations of new temples, layering power upon power. The Olmec gesture of inversion, of deliberate concealment as an act of power, became part of the Mesoamerican ritual vocabulary. Understanding this one practice, therefore, gives us a cipher. It helps decode the shared spiritual language of an entire cultural sphere, revealing how diverse peoples, from the Zapotec to the Teotihuacanos, grappled with the same eternal questions. Ultimately, moving beyond the mystery of the upside-down statues allows us to move beyond seeing the Olmec as merely the makers of enigmatic art. It lets us recognize them as what they were: sophisticated theologians, philosophers, and statesmen. They used the language of stone and earth to wrestle with universal human concerns: how to honor memory without being paralyzed by it, how to wield power without being corrupted by it, and how to face eternity with both reverence and pragmatism. Their solution was not written on parchment but performed in the earth, a silent, profound negotiation with time itself that continues to speak to us from the dark, receptive soil. The earth held their secrets, but the stones have not stopped speaking. Our journey into the dark soil with the Olmec reveals a civilization whose actions were woven from many threads: religion and politics, pragmatism and starlight, fear and profound hope. The deliberate inversion of hundreds of statues was never a single answer to a simple question. It was a complex ritual language, a grammar of stone and earth used to articulate the most fundamental human concerns. Was it a sacred decommissioning, a reverent retirement for a living essence, a stark act of political theater, burying the faces of old rulers to cement a new order? Perhaps it was a form of agricultural magic, a symbolic planting of stone to ensure the harvest, or a precise alignment with the turning cosmos. Each theory we have explored illuminates a different facet of the Olmec world, a different frequency in their silent broadcast across time. What remains undeniably clear is that these were not casual discards or acts of blind violence. They were thoughtful, significant communal ceremonies that actively shaped their history and literally laid the foundation for their future. The pits were not graves in a conventional sense, but transformative spaces where endings were negotiated and new beginnings were ritually seeded. As we stand before these colossal heads in the bright, quiet halls of museums today, we must remember their original orientation. Those stern faces were never meant to gaze at passing crowds. They were designed, in their final sacred act, to look into the heart of the earth itself, to commune with the dark, generative forces that the Olmec believed sustained all life. This enduring mystery does more than puzzle us. It challenges our very approach to the past. It asks us to listen more deeply to the silent stories artifacts tell, to perceive the careful intention in every layer of colored clay and every precise alignment. The true lesson of the upside-down statues may not be a definitive why, but an invitation to hold multiple truths at once, to appreciate the rich, layered consciousness of a people who managed their universe with stone, soil, and profound ceremony. If this exploration into ancient minds has captivated you, consider subscribing for more journeys into history's greatest puzzles. We would love to hear your thoughts. Which theory for these deliberate burials resonates most with you? Share your perspective in the comments below.